You're listening to Dateline Latin America, Tear Gas and Tango with
Joe Goldman, 37 years with ABC News, then with UPI, with The Village Voice, and many other.
And me, Daniel Schweimler, originally from London, formerly of the BBC, 19 years, and more recently with Al Jazeera English across Latin America.
They'll be sitting at a kitchen table in Buenos Aires talking about their journalistic adventures across the region, covering earthquakes, flooding and fires, talking to presidents, charlatans, sports stars and other newsmakers. In short, journalism and the state of the world.
So the former president of Argentina, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, she's now well and truly into her 6-year prison term, being served in her house in a very nice part of Buenos Aires. She was found guilty in 2022 of dodgy dealing with business people down in the south of Argentina, and that decision was upheld recently by the Supreme Court here in Argentina. There were huge protests, some of the biggest I've ever seen in Buenos Aires last Wednesday when she began her sentence. Tens of thousands of people all over the country, trade unionists, teachers, families, supporters of her Peronist party, all out there in huge numbers, a very peaceful protest against her conviction, saying it was politically motivated. She'd done, nothing wrong, certainly not enough to spend 6 years in prison and be banned from holding public office for the rest of her life. Joe, you don't think she was guilty? You think it was a political setup job?
Absolutely. It's unthinkable. If she was guilty, then Mauricio Macri, who followed her as president, would be quadruply guilty of all kinds of maneuvers. The court proceedings actually against her began 9 years ago, and the initiator of the whole court proceeding was Macri's highway superintendent, a man named Javier Milei. We could go into a whole history about Mr. Milei and the tremendous amount of criminal charges against him over the years, but I won't go into that right now. She was charged basically with giving business to Lázaro Báez, who is a businessman from Santa Cruz, her province in Patagonia. And Mr. Báez got all kinds of contracts for highway construction. In fact, of the 81 contracts that were in play here, he got 51 of them. The thing is, he is from Santa Cruz. He has his business in Santa Cruz. Businessmen from other areas, including Macri's own cousin, Calcaterra, testified in the courts that it was obvious that a businessman from Santa Cruz, with equipment there, with personnel there, with all the infrastructure in the province, would get 51 of the 81 bid contracts on the highway construction. The original court case had auditors set up, 2 engineers and a contractor, doing an audit on all the business arrangements, supposedly spurious business adventures. And they came up with no charges against Cristina or any of the other people who were thought to be responsible.
Although Lázaro Báez, the man she's accused of doing business with, is serving a prison term at the moment. I've been down to Rio Gallegos, where a lot of these projects were started, many of them not finished. I was taken on a tour by, must be said, then opposition member, who was showing us the roads that hadn't been finished, the swimming pool that didn't have any water in it, buildings half finished. That's not to say that Cristina Kirchner was involved in these, but Lázaro Báez certainly hadn't completed these jobs. He'd taken the money from government and hadn't finished those jobs. The implication was that there was strong cases of corruption involved in his business enterprises.
What he's in jail for is accounts in Switzerland that he did not claim in his taxes and stuff. He got into trouble for that, as well as his kids also were jailed for that. Now, if that is something that can get you into jail, I would say 95% of Argentine businessmen would be in jail today, and we'd have trouble getting anything done in the country. Swiss bank accounts, Panamanian bank accounts.
Yeah, they've
Mr.
all,
Iguacel, the
yeah.
highway superintendent, was part of Paradise Papers, where he smuggled money out of the country hand and fist. I'm not here to defend Lazaro Baez or really to defend Cristina on these accounts, but the court case is very specific in its audit. And what the Supreme Court did was it did not look at these obvious evidence, the evidence presented. They constantly denied procedural stuff from Christina's lawyers. And it's just obvious that this was between media, the courts, and the political climate. This was a kangaroo court.
It's the way, to some degree, that politics is usually done in Latin America, isn't it? Somebody comes into power. I mean, clientelism, I think it's called. You bring in your friends, you bring in your business associates. In the Kirchner's case, many of them came from the Santa Cruz province, where Nestor Kirchner is from. The guy running the central bank, the person running the environment department, whatever it may be. You bring in people you trust, members of your own family, business people you knew.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then when the government changes, the same thing happens. And it's so often the case that there's a court case against an outgoing president, outgoing members of their cabinet. And that was certainly the case here. We saw it in Brazil as well. As soon as Lula left office, Bolsonaro starts a case against him, finds what to my mind was a spurious, unaccounted for apartment on the beach near Sao Paulo. He spent a year and a half in prison before he was then released. I saw the evidence. There was nothing in it. Yet the people looking at it, members of the then government, the Bolsonaro government, and his allies, again in the media, were absolutely convinced that this guy was guilty of fraud. And even though the evidence wasn't staring them in the face, they were adamant he should have spent time in jail. Him and all those around him. I think Cristina suffered a similar fate. She was from the previous government. The general feeling in Argentina at the time was she was corrupt. Everyone around her was corrupt. They should all go to hell or prison if not. And that they were determined. If you look hard enough, because of that clientelism, because of those contacts, you will always find a fault one way or the other in the paperwork.
I would say more than that, Daniel, that if you look at New York City, you will find a whole bunch of clientelismo going on in New York City to this day with our current mayor, Eric Adams, with all the shenanigans that a builder named Donald Trump
I've
did
heard of
in
him.
New York for years and years, even with Mauricio Macri as one of his partners in crime in New York. We can go into that in a further program. You do have natural allies, and to some degree, it's understandable that if there's a constructor in Cordoba, the second largest city, they will have certain access to functions in that area and they will win contracts. You can understand that. This was obviously a setup to try to get Cristina, and it's just, and it's different in a way from what happened with Lula, in that Lula's case was overturned by the Brazilian Supreme Court. Here, the Supreme Court is what really was the nail in the coffin for Cristina.
Yet one of the most common accusations among the protesters that I saw on the streets last week was they are all puppets of the Milei government. He's put them in place. There was never going to be any other decision because those three members of the court were always going to do Javier Milei's bidding, and that turned out to be the case. But why? I mean, she's ex-president, ex-vice president, ex-governor, ex-senator. She's been a major figure, the major figure, one could argue, in Argentine politics, for the last 20 years, maybe more.
Yeah.
And she's the current head of the Peronist Party. Which is still the main opposition, despite its many fractures, its infighting. It's still the most powerful opposition to Javier Milei's government could bring tens of thousands out onto the streets if they ever make friends with all the trade union leaders. They're their natural allies. They will be millions out on the streets. So I guess, and she was going to stand, wasn't she, in the elections later this year, as in the Buenos Aires province elections. So
And one could say that once she came out and said she was going to be a candidate, that is when the Supreme Court decided that they were going to make this ruling. Part of the ruling, apart from the 6 years, is she cannot accept a political appointment or run for office. I believe for life.
For life, yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a 6-year prison term under house arrest because she's 72 years old. So anyone in Argentina over 70 gets to spend, not always, they could have made an exception. And there were a lot of rumors before this final sentence was passed that she would be sent to a common prison, even though she was over that 70 years old.
An interesting fact about that was what one person brought up, who was a former Kirchner aide, was that in all of Argentina, there was no prisoner, no woman prisoner over 70 years old who was not in home detention, who was actually in jail. And they were talking about doing that. She would have been the only one. There are women murderers who are under house arrest because they're over 70 years old.
Because there were strong rumors. I mean, she lives 5 kilometers away from the court where they were due to make this decision, announce this decision. And there was a lot of talk about thousands, tens of thousands of people lining that route on the way to the Comodoro P courthouse.
Yeah.
In the end, what the judges did was made the decision via email the day before, the Tuesday before. So then it was announced, and it kind of deflated the tension for a while. It announced that she would be under house arrest with an electronic ankle bracelet on. But the conditions were never clear. And then Cristina herself was saying, well, what does this mean exactly? Who can visit me? Who's not allowed to visit me? Can I do online conversations? Am I allowed to go onto my balcony? Because in very kind of typical Argentinian Evita style, appearing on a balcony is a big, symbolic gesture in Argentine politics. Could she go onto the balcony at her house at 1111 San Jose and talk to the many hundreds of people who have been camping outside the house for weeks now? Sleeping on the street, in support of Cristina Kirchner. And if they would have made the decision to send her to prison, they would have it turns her into a martyr. Which is the last thing that Javier Milei wants, So again, they're having to make a decision. What is the best way to deflate the support for Cristina Kirchner? And I guess their decision was house arrest, electronic ankle bracelet, and then I suppose a very tight restrictions on who can visit her and when and if she's allowed to leave her house.
I was out of the country for part of the time of the build up to this, but I do remember listening to some of the anti-Cristina media, which is a lot here, and they were very vocal about how she should be under house arrest because they didn't want to face what they felt was going to be a huge amount of protests if she was actually sent to prison.
Yeah.
So I think that really weighed in the final decision of house arrest.
Of course, the other high-profile criminals who have been allowed to live under house arrest in Argentina are the former members, the killers, the murderers of the military government here in Argentina. Many of them are under house arrest, the ones who are still alive, obviously. But are often allowed out. They're allowed to the funerals of their ex-colleagues. They have often been reported wining and dining in fancy restaurants in Buenos Aires. These are killers. These are murderers. These are people with blood on their hands who have been given house arrest. To most people's minds, should have been sent to prison, to the worst prisons in Argentina to suffer their fate. But they lead, these are guys in their 90s, 80s and 90s now. They weren't going to leave their house very often anyway, yet they are often allowed to. So the comparisons have been made. The hypocrisy has been highlighted between their fate, the decisions made against them, and what Cristina's been sentenced to and what she will be allowed to do.
No, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, whether it will even last 6 years. We're talking about a country that is very, very soft on white collar crime in general. I mean, let's not forget that ex President Macri has had a court case on the Postal Service for about 25 years. It's been kicking around the different courts. He was part of the privatization process under Menem. He got the Postal Service, and part of the deal was he put up this amount of money, a payment, an annual payment for taking on the Postal Service, that he would have to pay the government for doing this, for getting this service. And he never, ever paid.
Hmm.
He didn't pay anything.
And his name appears quite prominently on the Panama Papers as well.
Oh,
He's got millions of ill-gotten gains stashed away in offshore accounts. Yeah.
Yes. I've interviewed his father a couple of times, his father who passed away, who was probably the cleanest of the Macris in many ways. An old man who came from Italy and really built up this family fortune. But getting back to the post office case, he never paid a cent. I know people who were part of other consortia that were trying to win that bid. They put up lesser bids and thought Macri's bid was crazy. How could you put up that kind of a bid of what you would pay on an annual basis for the Postal Service? They thought it was crazy. And it was, because he wasn't going to pay it.
But again, we come back to this kind of the way things are in Latin America, and the media not reporting on the white collar crime, partly because editors, senior journalists, you and I, let's come clean here. We often do things, changing money on the black market, for instance. Is it illegal? Is it legal? Everybody does it. Yeah, I'm just assuming, and I think I'm assuming correctly, because we all do it because you have to in order to survive in this country. Yeah, if they wanted to come down on you or I, the authorities, even though they're doing it themselves, every policeman, every lawyer, every politician, if they wanted to give us foreign journalists a hard time, they could say easily, Joe and Daniel, they changed on the black market, and here's the evidence. The fact that 90%, 99% of the middle and upper classes in Argentina have done exactly the same, irrelevant. If they were out to get us, they would. And I feel that's exactly what they've done. And I'm not saying that she's innocent of the charges against her, because she's probably not. But she's just done what any politician has had to do. Those decisions that are made around the barbecue, around the asado, in the holiday homes in the summer, loads of decisions are made in that way. And, sometimes the paperwork is in order and sometimes it's not. And sometimes there's you pay for the hotel, or, your private jet is paid for. We see it all over the world. But I just think it's a bit more blatant here in Latin America. It's always the way business has been done.
I think so, although I really think that there's different levels of crime. What I described about the Postal Service is something that not only is a dastardly crime by the Macri family, but it also meant that a lot of foreign investors got shafted. And their experience meant they're not going to do any kind of business here.
Right.
So you have that, and that happened with the phone privatization, with a number of the privatizations during the Menem 90s here. And that affects the country for decades. I don't think what Cristina did here was in any order of magnitude similar, even if it was illegal. The auditors in the original investigation said that there was a minimum difference of 0.6% between monies paid out and what was actually built. You could talk all you want. The other thing is, there was this whole idea of that they were routes that went nowhere. We know Patagonia, Daniel. Most of the routes that seemingly go nowhere
because there's nowhere to go. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah.
Patagonia.
Yeah.
There are routes that go to the next province and then they're not built. Just as I can talk about going through Wyoming and having the same situation as you go to Utah from Wyoming or whatever.
I mean, we could also go back to, I know, as far back as I can remember, the Carlos Menem presidency in the 90s. From him onwards, every single ex-president has been prosecuted for something or other, sometimes on many scores. Sometimes they stuck, sometimes they were given immunity, but there were cases against Menem, against De La Rua, against Dualde, against vice presidents as well. Against Fernandez, yeah.
His wife.
With his wife, yeah, for hitting his wife. But yeah, I mean, it's the way politics is done. You know, Bolsonaro comes to office in Brazil, cases against Lula, which he got to stick for that, you know, and no doubt there are cases against, he's in court at the moment, Jair Bolsonaro, for trying to initiate a coup when he left office. And no doubt when Lula leaves office again, you know, he's an old man now, but no doubt whoever follows him will initiate similar charges. Again, it's just a way of...
Chile, I don't think that happens.
Maybe less so in Chile. I think Bachelet, it didn't happen. Piñera, well, he's died now, hasn't he? But
even the opposition will talk about Piñera being an honest man.
Yeah.
The opposition would say the same about Bachelet. Peru is a disaster.
Peru, there's not a president.
Every president since Alan Garcia in '85 has been
prosecuted, yeah. So, and Garcia's case, he killed himself before he could be prosecuted, didn't he? So, but certainly there were cases against him. Yanto Omala, you know, is now being prosecuted. Fujimori, who resigned from his Tokyo hotel room, all of them, yeah.
Nobody is left office unscathed.
And I think Ecuador very much the same. So most of the countries in Latin America, you said with the possible exception of Chile, that's the way things are done.
Uruguay, I think, is a good
Uruguay,
also.
Well, Uruguay's a near perfect country. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with Uruguay. Nothing wrong with Uruguay. So.
Nobody would have prosecuted.
No, nothing to prosecute him for. I mean, going back to Cristina, I wonder, 6 years under house arrest, do you think, I mean, hopefully there'll be a change of government before that 6 years is up. I don't think many think that Milei will continue in office. There needs to be another candidate leading the opposition. Do you think she would serve that full 6 years? It depends who comes in after Milei, I guess. If it's someone of a similar political ilk, then probably no. If it's somebody equally as authoritarian and right-wing as Milei, then probably yes.
And the other possibility that her lawyers had talked about is going to international courts.
Right.
The Costa Rica Human Rights Court is a possibility to see if there is proof that she was boondoggled into this, or if the courts acted properly or not.
Yeah.
That would be a case that could release her from prison.
Yeah, although I suspect she might win the moral argument, but Milei, very much like Trump, if he doesn't like the workings of these big global organizations, they just basically pull out and ignore them. You don't like the Paris Accord on climate change, let's pull out. You don't like the World Health, Argentina's already pulled out of the World Health Organizations. They're likely to do the same with any kind of criminal investigation as well. Yeah, internationally it would be a huge embarrassment. She would have won the argument, but it doesn't mean they would take that ankle bracelet off and let her go, I guess.
Absolutely. She has an ankle bracelet. That's the other thing. Now, she has gone out on the balcony a few times, kind of testing limits a bit.
Well, she asked publicly. She actually said, I don't understand the conditions that I've been, asked to live under. Am I allowed on the balcony? Am I not? Am I allowed to do Zoom calls? Just tell me what I'm allowed to do and what not. They didn't answer her. And when the crowds were gathered in the Plaza de Mayo on the day she started her sentence, she produced an audio recording, which was played to the crowds, which was very moving, to see these tens of thousands of people listening, with their mouths open to this recording coming out over the plaza. And then at the end, she went live. She said, hola, soy Cristina, San Jose 1111, her address. Estoy hablando con ustedes. And she spoke very short, very briefly, again, pushing the boundaries, testing the waters to see what the restrictions were. I've seen no comeback to that, whether they kind of punished her in some kind of way or made it clearer publicly what she's allowed to do and what not to do. But she will get visitors from her son, Maxi, who is her chosen heir in the Peronist movement. I mean, mean, the Peronist movement is split, isn't it, between Maxi and your friend Axel Kicillof, no? Probably the two main contenders. Will one of them follow in Cristina's very difficult to follow footsteps?
Cristina was the object of a terrible assassination attempt.
2022, September the 1st, 2022. The cases had already started against her.
Yes.
Tens of thousands of people were outside her house, or hundreds of people anyway, outside of her house. And then she came out onto the street to meet them. And this guy, since been arrested, pointed a gun. He was very close to, right.
We had the image.
Yeah, it was, very close. No way he could have missed, and there's no way it wouldn't have killed her. But thankfully, the mechanism in the gun didn't work. It didn't go off. So he pulled the trigger, nothing happened, and then they jumped on him and arrested him. Who gave the order for him to be there? He's serving time in prison now, but they've never really established if anybody was behind this attempt.
They have protected a few people, including the family of Economy Minister Caputo, including Millman, one of the congressmen who was extremely involved in this situation. And I'm not pointing the finger and saying they were the ones behind. The thing that really calls one's attention is none of these people were asked to appear in court to explain away why they had relations with this crazy guy and his group of very strange people who were running around protesting things like the pandemic. They were protesting against the government closing down schools, and they were involved in all these protests against the government of Alberto Fernandez. And those protests got violent. They did protests where they would have body bags and they would be representative of Peronist politicians. If that isn't violent, I don't know what is.
I suspect this is one of these cases which will never see the light of day, certainly not until there's a change of government. It's not going to, there'll be rumours and there'll be speculation and there'll be investigations, but I just think it's not going to come to court while Milei's in power.
We can deny all we want, but it was filmed by 100 different cameras. I remember that day working with ABC, we got to pick and choose what we thought was the best image from different cameras. I mean, you have to understand, everybody's sitting outside of Cristina's house, had their iPhones and were taking pictures. It was for everybody to see. You couldn't deny it.
I mean, an assassination attempt against her, 6 years in prison and banned from political life for what many believe is a crime she didn't commit. Do you think, despite their best efforts, this is still going to turn her into some kind of political martyr?
As much as I really like the governments of the Kirchners for 12 and a half years, 1/8 of a century that they were in power, sometimes it's time to move on.
Right.
Sometimes, and we have seen that play out in Bolivia, in Ecuador, in Brazil, where leaders stay on and don't allow this young contingent to come from behind and really create different governments and new governments. Maybe not exactly the same Peronist government, maybe something different. But it's important to have that change. What this does with Cristina, setting her up as a martyr, means that also that time for change is being kicked ahead. And I think it's a damaging thing in many ways for not only for Argentina, but for the opposition.
Again, it's the cult of the individual savior, isn't it? We had it with her predecessor, Evita, back in the 1940s and 50s. Menem, I remember when he came to power, was a bit of a clown character, yet was still perceived to be the savior of the country. We have it outside of politics, Maradona, the single-handedly winning Argentina the World Cup in '86. Again, it's that cult of the individual. The Cristina Kirchner rally the other day, huge banners, posters of her late husband, the former president Nestor Kirchner. He's long gone. He died in 2010. Yet the figurehead, the symbol, what he symbolized, in the same way that Perón symbolizes a movement without people being able to specify exactly what he symbolizes. He is a hugely powerful symbolic figure. And Nestor is becoming something the same. And the combination of Nestor and Cristina Kirchner does something there as well. So it's being constructed, the image of the individual or individual savior.
I have to say that part of the amount of stardom of the Kirchners is due to the horrendous governments that have come after them.
Yeah.
I mean, you can point to their governments and, they were far from perfect, but there was growth here. They were really good governments, like it or not. And after them, I mean, just look at what's happened with the IMF in the intervening years. Nestor Kirchner paid off the IMF $9.8 billion and basically set it up so that the IMF would not come in here and tell Argentina what to do, because they always tell Argentina the wrong things to do.
A lot of the people out there on the protest were, irrespective of the economic politics, they were people who were thanking her for allowing same-sex marriage. Trans people were out there thanking her for giving them the freedom to be themselves. All sorts of, groups were out there. Anyone related to abortion, human rights, investigations into the horrendous things that went on in the military dictatorship. They were the ones, again, whatever else you criticize them for, they opened the doors to all these things to happen. So a lot of people are out there thanking her for what she had done for them.
What this does, these are disparate arguments. These are arguments that are sometimes people do not agree with each other. A lot of times they don't agree, the human rights sector with the economic sector or whatever. But this galvanizes that support. So I think you will see that now. I don't know if that will last for a long time, but you will see that as a force, really, that Christina's martyrdom is going to bring people together.
So beginning of a 6-year prison sentence, but let's see what happens in this next 6 years. It could be very interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's Christina. Next week, Joe, what are we going to talk about next week?
I think we have to get into the international scene, talking about Latin America, Argentina specifically, about what's going on with Iran and Israel and the effect that that could have in a country so far away like Argentina.
Now Israel's second most important friend after the United States, after
right.
Milei's visit. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Joe. Talk to you next week.
Okay, Daniel, take care.